He was born into a world where dreams seemed like a luxury and winter lasted longer than childhood hopes. His father had the tired hands of a farmer, his mother had a gentle smile that could hide worries, and he had a pencil that could draw any life except the one he lived. In the cold rooms of the old house, he drew on scraps of newspaper, on the backs of bills, on anything he could find, for paper was scarce and imagination was the only wealth. Sometimes he would paint the walls of a barn or paint an old horse in blue and red spots, just to make his neighbors laugh. He did not yet know that one day he would color the world of millions of people. But even then, in a poor corner of America, he was learning the most important thing, how to bring a dream to life, even when there was nothing around but cold and dust. He grew up in Marceline, a small town in Missouri, where the air smelled of freshly cut grass and the days seemed endless when you were a kid. Everyone knew everyone else, and the biggest attraction was the annual fair, where hot pies were sold and the prettiest horses in the county were displayed. Walt loved those days more than for the food or the games. He loved to look at the streamer-decked wagons and the bright posters that fluttered by the stage. He always tried to get one to hang above his bed. To him, they were like windows into another world, a world of adventure, color, and fantasy. His family lived on a modest income. His father, Elias, was a strict man who believed in hard work more than in fairy tales. He did not understand why his son wasted time on drawings when he could have taken a shovel or helped with house repairs. His mother, Flora, on the contrary, saw this as a bright spot. She quietly gave him pencils and notebooks when she managed to save a few cents. It was thanks to her that he first got his little box of paints, and this became an event that he remembered for the rest of his life. Walt was not only a dreamer, but also a businessman. Even at the age of 10, he found ways to make money from his talent. Sometimes he worked part-time, painting his neighbors' barns with country scenes, cows in a meadow, golden wheat fields, bright sunsets. But the one that people remember most is the one with Mr. McIntyre's horse. The animal was old and sad, with dull fur. Walt decided it needed a new lease on life. He took some blue and red paint and turned it into a living carousel, painting the sides in patterns he had only seen in his head. Mr. McIntyre was angry at first, but when he saw all the children laughing and running after his horse down the street, he just waved it off. That moment was etched in Walt's memory. For the first time, he saw how his invention could change the mood of an entire town. But not all of his ideas were warmly received. At school, he often drew during lessons, and teachers scolded him for inattentiveness. Once, he decorated the school board with fairy tale characters from his own imagination, but instead of praise, he received punishment. He was forced to erase everything. For many adults, his fantasies were a waste of time. But inside, he felt that these fictional images meant more to him than any assignments from textbooks. In the evenings, when the lights went out in the city, he would sit on the porch and look at the stars. Whole worlds came to life in his mind: cowboys, wizards, brave travelers. He imagined how one day he would show these stories to others. But for now, his audience was only his younger brothers and sisters, to whom he told made-up tales, accompanying them with quick drawings on scraps of paper. When he was 12, his family moved to Kansas City. Life there became harsher. He delivered newspapers before dawn to help support his family. It was hard work, dark streets, cold mornings, fingers aching from the cold. But even then, when he returned home, he would sit down and draw. He often drew pictures of the people he met while delivering: tired workers, sleepy shopkeepers, homeless people warming their hands by the fire. His drawings brought to life what others passed by indifferently. During those years, he first felt that art could be true, even when it was fictional, and that behind this truth, pain could be hidden that others did not always notice. One evening, he came across a small cinema where a silent film was being shown. He froze. On the screen, in the flickering light, characters came to life, speaking not with words, but with movements. He returned home a completely different person. Something changed inside him. He saw that his drawings could also come to life. From that time on, he began to study everything he could find about animation. His first attempt was a funny one. He drew a series of pictures in a school notebook where a little man was waving his arms. Quickly turning the pages, he saw the figure come to life. It was like magic. None of his peers took it seriously, But for him, it was the answer to the question he had been searching for years: how to turn imagination into life. He became a regular visitor to local libraries, reading books about artists and inventors. Some of them he didn't understand, but the very fact that somewhere in the world there were people building their own universes gave him faith that he could do it too. But not only inspiration, but also challenges awaited him. His teenage years brought his first major rejections. He was rejected by one art school due to his low level of technique. Later, working as a courier, he tried to sell his drawings to local newspapers, and again received rejection after rejection. Some bluntly told him that, with this style, he would achieve nothing. Walt didn't stop. He realized that if the door wouldn't open, he could draw it himself, and just walk through it. The turning point came on one of those ordinary evenings when most boys his age were playing baseball or hanging out in the streets, and he was wandering around town, looking for something new. On the corner of the main street, he saw a sign for a movie theater. Cheap tickets for the evening showing. The inside smelled of dust and popcorn, the lamps flickered, and the screen was a little scratched, but when the lights went out he forgot everything around him. Hand-drawn figures came to life before his eyes, moving, laughing, falling, getting up again. It was like watching magic, but without the magician, just pictures that lived. He sat there, holding his breath, until the last frame, and when he stepped outside, the air seemed different, colder but cleaner. There was only one thought racing through his head: I can do this too. At home, he did not go to sleep. He found an old notebook and began to draw a series of pictures. A little man taking off his hat and bowing. He spent the night, not feeling the time, and when the sun rose, he tried to quickly turn the pages. And suddenly he saw, the figure was moving. It was a real miracle, created by his own hands. He showed this find to his friends at school, expecting admiration. But instead he heard laughter. "This is for children," one said. "So what? Are you going to draw cartoons now?" another sneered. Even the teacher to whom he brought the notebook only grimaced. "Walt, this is a waste of time. Focus on something serious." The words hurt more than he wanted to show. In those days, drawing was considered a hobby, not a way of life. Animation seemed frivolous, childish. Some even thought he was humiliating himself by wasting his evenings on nonsense, when he could be working to help support his family. But he couldn't stop. In every free minute, he would invent new stories that could be brought to life. He would try drawing on transparent sheets to superimpose one movement on another, and figure out how to make the character blink or laugh. Paper was expensive, so he used everything: old bills, grocery wrappers, the backs of posters he collected on the street. His older brother Roy would sometimes come into the room and see him bent over the table, drawing dozens of identical figures with barely noticeable differences. "You're crazy," he would say. "You spend hours just to turn it all over in 5 seconds." "But it's movement, Roy," Walt would reply, his eyes twinkling. "A movement I created." But not everyone was as patient as his brother. His father saw it as a pointless waste of time and materials. He could have walked into the room, grabbed a few sheets of paper, and thrown them in the trash. "People need bread, not your drawings," he would say sharply. And yet the more he was condemned, the more he felt he was on the right path. He saw something in these drawings that others didn't yet understand. It wasn't just a child's joke. It was an opportunity to tell a story without a single word, to touch a person's emotions in the way that music or live theater can. One day he took the plunge and went to the local newspaper, hoping to get a job as an artist. He showed the editor his sketches, but heard a familiar voice. "You have no imagination, boy. You'd better find another job." These words were etched into his memory, but instead of breaking, they turned into fuel. If they didn't believe, he would show them. If they laughed, he would make them laugh in a different way, from genuine admiration. He began experimenting with light and shadow at night, trying to figure out how to add depth to his drawings. He didn't have any professional equipment, so he made a small wooden box with a hole and a lamp inside, a makeshift camera that helped him photograph his drawings one frame at a time. It was painstaking, almost meditative work that required hours and hours of patience. Walt began to realize that animation was not just an art, but a way of thinking. It required planning, engineering precision, attention to detail. And it was this blend of creativity and technique that fascinated him most. Gradually, he began to notice that even those who had laughed at him before would sometimes secretly peek at what he was doing. especially the children from neighboring houses, who would come in the evenings to see a drawn dog or a funny rabbit come to life on his makeshift screen. These small screenings became his first premieres, and although he didn't get a cent for them, the feeling that someone was laughing or surprised by his work was priceless. But his first big decision lay ahead, whether to stay in a city where he was only seen as a strange guy with a pencil, or go somewhere where his drawings could become something more than just a hobby. He hesitated for a long time. To stay would mean living a familiar life, in which every day was similar to the previous one. To leave would mean losing everything that had any stability and rushing into the unknown. But a fire burned within him that could no longer be extinguished. Every new move on the sheet, every improvised premiere at home proved he wanted more. One morning he gathered his best drawings, a few pages of moving series, and put them in a tattered bag. His mother, standing quietly by the door, looked at him as if she knew that he would go far and forever on this path. "Are you sure?" she asked. "No," he answered honestly. "But if I don't try now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He set off for the big city, where there were studios, cinemas, and advertising agencies. The train took him through endless fields, old factories, and small stations, and with every kilometer away from home, his heart beat faster. He had no acquaintances or a plan B, only a pencil, a notebook, and an unshakable belief that what was drawn could come to life. The first days were hard. He went from office to office, door to door, offering his work. In some places he was told, "We don't do animation, it doesn't make money." In others, they looked at him with a condescending smile. "The drawings are nice, but there are dozens of guys like you here." He spent several nights on park benches, saving his last coins. He was cold, hungry, but his hands still reached for the pencil. He drew passers-by, signs, even pigeons pecking at crumbs. All this could later become material for future animations. One day, he heard that a small film studio was looking for an artist to work on commercials. It was a tiny company, and the job involved creating simple drawings that were then filmed on camera. But for him, it was like the first ray of light after a long winter. A sullen man in a vest met him in the office. "What can you do?" he asked, without even looking up from his papers. Walt silently opened his notebook. There were comical sketches and series of moving figures, and more serious drawings. The man flipped through a few pages and shrugged. "Okay, let's try it. We'll pay a little." Thus began his first real job. He worked in a small room, where the smell of paint mixed with the hot light of the lamps, and the walls were covered with sketches. Here he first realized that animation is a team effort. Everyone was responsible for their own stage. One drew the backgrounds, another the characters, and the third filmed everything on camera. But even here, he was not without criticism. Colleagues sometimes joked that he took children's pictures too seriously. Some thought he spent too much time on small details, how a hand moved, how a hat bounced, how a light flickered in a window. But he knew that it was these little things that made the picture come alive. Over time, he began to dream of making his own short films. In the evenings, after work, he would stay in the studio and use the free camera. He would create his own characters, funny, sometimes a little strange, but memorable. He understood that if he wanted people to love his work, they had to see a part of themselves in it. One day, he organized a small demonstration for his colleagues. He turned off the lights, turned on the projector. A drawing of a mouse appeared on the screen, running away from a cat, and then outsmarting it. The audience erupted in laughter, then loud applause. That was the moment when he felt he could change the minds of even the most skeptical. But with this came new problems. Some executives began to consider him too ambitious. Rumors spread. He wants his own studio. He doesn't understand how business works. Some even tried to borrow his ideas, signing them with their own names. This became a painful lesson for him. The world of animation is full of not only creativity, but also competition, strict rules, and other people's ambitions. And yet, despite the pressure, despite the lack of money, he made his choice. He would go on, even if he had to start from scratch. Because for him, it was no longer just drawing. It was a mission to prove that animated lines on paper can touch the heart just like real life. He left the small studio just as he had once left his parents' house, without money, but with ideas that kept him up at night. A few dollars in his pocket, an old notebook with sketches in his hands, and ahead of him was a city that didn't know his name. Now he wanted to work only for himself. It was madness. Renting a small space, looking for an old camera, making the background, characters, movement, filming by himself. But madness itself often becomes the beginning of great stories. He found an abandoned basement. The brick walls were damp, the floor creaked, and only narrow rays of light filtered through the windows. It seemed to him that this was not a studio, but an empty box. But there was freedom here, and that was enough. During the day, he walked around the city, offering his ideas to advertising agencies. In the evenings, he worked in the basement. He made his first cartoons on scraps of film, which he bought for pennies. The camera often broke, the light was weak, the paints were cheap, but the characters came to life. And although the movements were uneven and the plot simple, in each frame the main thing was visible, the heart of the author. And that's when the real pressure started. Former colleagues scoffed. He thinks he'll build a studio out of nothing. A basement is not Hollywood. The newspapers to which he sent his work often returned letters with polite rejections. Your style is interesting, but there is no demand for this kind of animation right now. Friends turned away. Some were tired of his constant talk about ideas. Others simply didn't believe that drawings could feed them. But one evening, while working on a new project, he came up with a character that turned everything upside down. He wasn't a hero from books. He wasn't a beast from fairy tales, but a creature that combined intelligence, naivety, and a great kind soul. He drew him at night, changing the smallest details. How he blinked, how he tilted his head, how he laughed. He felt that this character was more than just a picture. When he first showed the cartoon to a small audience, the reaction was explosive. Children laughed, adults lingered after the screening to ask when there would be a sequel. It was the first time he saw animation blurring the lines between generations. But with fame came new blows. One of the partners he worked with took away the rights to the character, claiming it was his idea. The contract was drafted in such a way that Walt lost any influence over his own creation. It became painful, almost a betrayal. That night, he sat in the basement, staring at the blank pages, feeling like it was all in vain. But deep down, he knew that if he stopped now, he would lose not only his studio, but himself. He decided to start over. Without a character that everyone already knew, without money, but with the same pencil he had used to draw as a child. He was looking for a new idea again, and he wasn't going to give up. The train rocked on the rails, as if it were counting down the seconds to a new life. Walt sat in a third-class carriage, clutching a notebook and drawing. It was his only defense against thoughts of betrayal, bankruptcy, and an unknown future. Leaving behind the partner who had taken his first successful character, he felt like he had lost a part of himself. Suddenly, an image appeared in his head. Not a lion, not a tiger, not a Prince Charming, but a little mouse, with round ears, bright eyes, and a smile that could melt the hearts of even those who had never liked cartoons. He began to draw quickly, as if afraid that the idea would escape. A few strokes, and Mickey was born. Returning to the basement studio, he immediately set to work. But at that time, silent animation was no longer captivating the public. It was necessary to take a risk and make a cartoon where the hero not only moves, but also talks, laughs, and sings. This seemed technically almost impossible for a small studio with cheap equipment. When Walt announced the plan to the team, the reaction was mixed. We're not going to pull the sound. It'll ruin us completely. Even the big studios don't do that. Even fellow animators condemned him. Disney and his mice. Does he think people will go to the movies to listen to a squeaky voice? He's just a child who hasn't grown up. He was truly a child at heart, but a child who stubbornly refused to give up. To raise money for the recording, he mortgaged everything he had and took out a loan that he would hardly be able to repay in case of failure. He spent days and nights in the studio. Mickey had to live, speak, and sing in such a way that people would love him at first sight. The premiere took place in a small cinema in New York. The audience laughed and applauded, and after the screening, children ran up to hear that cheerful little mouse again. The success was instant. And that's when the critics struck again. The newspapers wrote, "This is entertainment for children. The real art is in serious cinema. Disney mice will spoil the taste of the new generation." But Walt already knew the main thing. He had created something that made people happy, and no more reviews could ruin that. Mickey became a symbol of hope, especially during the Great Depression. People lost their jobs and homes, but for a few minutes in a dark room, they forgot about their problems and laughed with the little hero. This success gave Walt new courage. He dreamed of a full-length animated film, and everyone again said that it was madness. But he remembered that moment on the train when a mouse was born from nothing. And he knew, the craziest ideas often become the biggest victories. He was on the verge of something bigger than any of his previous projects. The idea of a full-length animated film seemed unbearably big, dangerous, like jumping into the abyss without a parachute. Everyone he knew thought it was a mistake. Critics, investors, even his closest friends were saying the same thing. It's never going to work. People won't sit around for 2 hours and watch moving pictures. You risk losing everything you've built. But for him, it wasn't just a bet, it was a belief. A belief that history can come to life not just in the form of short, fun clips, but as true art that touches everyone's heart. Work on the film began in a small studio, where each frame required incredible attention. Drawings were redrawn hundreds of times to ensure that the movements were smooth, the emotions were alive, and the world was both fabulous and believable. The crew worked day and night, sometimes sleeping on the floor, forgetting about food, giving themselves completely to the process. Walt personally oversaw every aspect, from character design to music selection, believing that every detail mattered because it was the details that made the magic happen. The premiere of Snow White was a real test. The risk was so great that many held on to the edge of their seats, not believing that it could work. When the lights went out and the first frames came to life on the screen, there was silence in the hall. Everyone held their breath. Then the audience erupted in applause. It was the moment when a new art form was born, an art that would change cinema forever. The film became a legend, turning Walt into a symbol of courage and faith in a dream. But he didn't stop there. New challenges awaited him. The construction of Disneyland, which seemed like an even bigger adventure than any cartoon. After the success of Snow White, Walt could have stopped, profited, and lived on the wave of fame. But his heart yearned for more, a place where fantasy became reality, where adults and children could experience the fairy tale together, not just watch it on a screen. The idea for an amusement park came to him unexpectedly, during a trip with his children to a local amusement park. Walt saw how disappointed they were. Too loud, too chaotic, too commercial. He realized the world needed another place. A place created with love, where every detail would breathe a fairy tale. He began to draw plans. These were not just sketches. This was a vision of a world where everyone could feel like a hero of their favorite story. But again, the skeptics were quick to respond. A park? This is nonsense. Where are you investing your money? I would rather make cartoons. It will never pay off. Despite all his doubts, he began looking for investors. But no one wanted to risk money on this strange project, which seemed like a childhood dream idea that would never become a reality. With no support, Walt took charge. He enlisted friends, partners, and even his own savings. Long nights of negotiations, signing contracts, finding land, and hiring workers began. Creating the park was like building a new country. He personally supervised every corner, every sign, every flower. For him, it was more than a business. It was his childhood dream come true. The opening of the park was a grand event. People from all over the country came to enter this world where fairy tales came to life. And although there were some problems on the first day, and some attractions broke, the smiles of the children and the admiring looks of the adults overcame all the difficulties. Disneyland changed the way we think about entertainment and became a symbol of hope, joy, and dreams. Walt proved that even the wildest ideas can become reality if you are not afraid to go forward, no matter what.